Welcome to Switching On Electrified Skills, the podcast that sparks your curiosity and ignites your passion for a career in electrification. I'm Deepak Farmah. Join me on this electrifying adventure where I connect you with industry leaders, visionary education providers, and pioneers driving the electric revolution. Discover the world of skills, jobs, and community, gaining actionable insights, inspiring stories, and the latest developments. Now for a quick announcement, and listeners, this isn't an announcement you want to miss. Switching On Electrified Skills is giving away cutting-edge electric bikes from our top UK manufacturer, EBCO e-bikes. This exciting giveaway is going to run from 19th of December 2023 to 26th of March 2024. Entering to win is simple. Subscribe to the ERS Hub YouTube channel and listen to any podcast episode. Hit the like button and drop a comment on your favorite podcast episode, sharing what you enjoyed most about the episode and why you want an e-bike. And subscribe to our newsletter. For all the details, hurry and head over to the episode description on your preferred podcast platform to find the rules and the terms and conditions. Please take a look at the privacy notice. All participants must be 18 and over to enter and reside in the UK. Participants will be selected by me and my team. Entry is free with a limited one entry per person. Good luck to you all. When we look at building skills for a nascent market, it's important to understand that we use the word workforce development. The word workforce development can become quite industrialized. There's more to that we need to look at, and more to that we need to support. And actually, the skills are an important factor, but what about the human factors? What about the well-being of people? What about how do we help them to transition, and how do we help employers to become more better at trying to help those that are trying to move into our space? Today, I'm very lucky to have a very important guest, Dr. Audrey Tang, who is a Chartered Psychologist and mental health broadcaster. She's joining us today to be able to talk to us about some of these subject areas. And her work over the last many years has been focused on that human factor, on those around sort of edge cases where, we're trying to support people and trying to come closer to our space, but be able to think about what are the barriers that are there, how do we overcome those barriers, and how do we do more. So welcome, Audrey. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and a great topic to talk about.
Brilliant. I'm really excited about today because I've read some of your books. I've had a look at some of the work that you've been doing. I'm so excited to hear about this pragmatic approach and these toolkits and these things that people can use and employers can, utilize to help, support this market. As you know, we've been working over the last few years to support the engineering sector and, trying to support them to try to support people in becoming more closer to our space. But this resonates across all sectors, all sort of workforce, because it's about people. It's about, the human factors. It's about understanding that wider side, that skills are the technical part of this development, but actually there's a whole psyche here that we need to be supporting and we need to be more aware of if we're really going to make a dent in terms of trying to support the development of these workforces. So to start off with, really a little bit about yourself and why you're in this space, and what made you want to dedicate such amount of your time to this such an important subject.
Well, thank you for asking. It's really nice to revisit some of that journey sometimes. I started off as a secondary school teacher in drama and psychology. Absolutely loved it. But what I was finding, and this is back in 2008 now, so thank you for being very kind and saying many years as opposed to how many years. I had the opportunity to do a PhD, and by this point I was getting a little bit disillusioned with the classroom in that I loved the teaching, but there were so many other factors coming in to it. Red tape, report writing, and not just report writing that helps the students, but a lot of bureaucracy, all of those things, lack of support for staff, lack of understanding of mental health issues that not only students were facing, but staff were facing. And I had the opportunity to do a PhD in something called emotional labour. And emotional labour is what forward-facing professionals experience. They have to know their job. They have to know, so for a nurse, they have to know how to take blood. They have to know how to administer medicine and so on. But the emotional labor part is the expectation of people being able to hold that emotional expected space for other people. So as a teacher, you might have had a really bad class. People could have been throwing chairs around you and that sort of thing. But you then have to, for the next class, be, hi, how are you? It's all great. And if you don't have time to address some of the things that you've been feeling, if you have or experience lack of support from management, you end up having a problem. And what I found in my research was that it wasn't that people felt the demands of the job were problematic. They, in fact, went into those professions knowing they were seeing people often at their most vulnerable. Learning is a scary place, being ill is a scary place. But it was the extra bureaucracy. It was the lack of support. It was a lot of the organizational facets that were actually contributing to the fact that good staff were leaving the workplace. And that's what I started doing in 2008, and in 2012, submitted, got my doctorate. And that's where I really started focusing on management and business psychology and organizational practice, because I don't believe it's enough to say, right, people are struggling, so what can we give them? I honestly think it's about changing the systemic practices sometimes, because otherwise it's a little bit like saying, if you've got somebody who's struggling, they're burnt out, they're emotionally exhausted, oh, great, let's give you lessons in resilience, let's teach you how to build your strength. That's like me falling down a hole at work and then health and safety saying to me, oh, okay, well, let's teach you how to walk around that hole. The organizational practices need to change as much as we need to perhaps build or continue to build our mental and emotional health and fitness.
Absolutely. I think that I can relate to that. I mean, when I was teaching in my early years, it was like a performance, right? You'd leave a class, having done what you needed to do in that class, and then you'd have to almost have a few seconds of downtime and almost, hey, let's go again. Especially the demands of funding and finances on schools and stuff, the amount of, support that's needed for students. We get a lot of stuff around individual learning plans and all of these things that we have to put together as teachers, and it becomes a difficult task to do. It's quite draining. It stops you from what you set out to do in the first place.
Yeah. And,
your work that you've focused on, I mean, I was reading about it, it's quite interesting how, you focus, your recent 3 books, you're focusing on, the philosophy around gut, the mind, and just a little bit about that, I think was quite, if you can elaborate on that a little bit. I thought that was very interesting, how you moved that away from, just being about just resilience in the word resilience, and moved it to, something more, I don't know, more emotional and more connectable.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And it's lovely when I talk to teachers, because you absolutely get it. And all of those demands and pressures to give the student the best experience possible, we love that. We want to do that. We want to do all of those things. But when the demands from above keep saying, do more, you're not doing enough, they don't recognize you, that's where we have those problems. And so we do need to take an emotional approach to how people are going to be performing in the workplace, because if we're not feeling great, we're not actually going to perform at our best. And we need to remember, no one goes into the workplace to want to fail. We don't want to do that. So in terms of my 3 books, I've taken the head, heart, gut approach to it. So my first book was the Leader's Guide to Mindfulness, of the trilogy. I wrote Be a Great Manager as well before that, which almost, I feel quite bad for that book, because you got the trilogy in that one. But the Leader's Guide to Mindfulness focuses on the importance of having clarity of thought, being able to know what's needed and have a clear vision of what you want to put in place, and cut through the white noise of all the other stuff that's going on. Because when you're in a difficult space and there's a lot of chaotic energy, it can be very difficult to think. And so mindfulness was all about finding that clarity. Then I started the Leader's Guide to Resilience, which was the gut part, courage, at the beginning of the pandemic, and completely rewrote it during the pandemic, because I ended up thinking, wow, well, I've actually been through something where I've had to use that resilience and draw from that courage. I can't really carry on writing in the same way as I did before. And so that really focuses on, you've got the idea now, you've got that clarity of thought, but you need to have the strength to not only put those practices in place, but to follow them through, especially in the face of adversity. Because when it comes to resilience, a lot of people think it's just about bouncing back. No, it's not. No one wants to just bounce back. And besides, back is not necessarily the real or the reality of now. We need to think about springing forward. We need to think about going into the, I hate the phrase new normal, but I will use it. And so when it comes to resilience, what you tend to find is adversity can create the conditions to thrive. Adversity and having to face a difficult situation means that you discover in yourself that you probably had strengths that you didn't know, you had skills that you didn't know, and you got through it, and you're able to now almost flourish in a way that had you not been through it, you may not actually achieve that amount of growth. So resilience was not just about having the strength to get through, but actually having the ability to thrive once you got through the other side. And then we got to well-being, because when it comes to having the idea, having the strength to put it into place and follow it through, unless you can work with your teams, unless you can make collaborations, unless you can support the people around you and network and be able to work with people around you, how on earth can you actually sustain any of those changes? What you sometimes get a lot of is leaders who have a great idea and they know that it's going to work and they'll push it through, but they've treated everyone so badly along the way that they lose their best teams. Something that I use in my training a lot is to warn people, if people start leaving, if your teams start leaving, it's going to be the good ones who are going to get jobs. And that means you're going to be left with people who perhaps can't fulfill your vision. So it really is important to look after the well-being of people, not only because it's going to encourage better performance, but it's actually going to work with when it comes to retention and when it comes to recruitment and overall sustainability. So that's why you've got the head, heart, gut trilogy with well-being, resilience, and mindfulness.
What an amazing way to put it. It's touched on a couple of subjects there that are very important, and we see it quite often. Especially when businesses sort of panic, right, and decide to restructure or try to do all these things. And you said about, people going to, good people tend to go and find jobs. But I guess for me a little bit is that there is this group of people that may still stay with you, but it isn't because, they weren't good at what they were doing. It's probably because they don't feel secure or safe enough to have gone out and said, I'm valuable, right? And I think the first part of that is really recognition. It's recognizing, there's a lucky few of us that it's probably less than 1% that, can be reasonably self-aware to be able to say, right, you know what, if this hasn't worked out for me, I'm going to go and find something else. And I'm going to do great at that. But effectively, when you've got some of those people that are, listening to this or trying to engage with some of the work that you've been doing, what can they do to recognize their own, strengths and skills and raise confidence in themselves that they can go out and, start looking at the next steps, even that first step?
It is very easy to become institutionalized. You get very comfortable somewhere and everything else seems a lot more scary. There is an old platitude which says it's easier to look for another job whilst you have a job. So in a way, that's a good place to start, is by taking stock and recognizing, well, what skills do I have in this particular job? And with that, look at how you can transfer those skills to something else. This is where you may need support from a coach, perhaps, but there's a lot of good literature out there as well. And there is something called bibliotherapy, where a book that gives you practical exercises that prompts you to reflect on some of these things, that can make a real difference. So one of the first exercises I'd probably ask you to just consider is a storyboard exercise. And this is, first of all, to think about your job right now and think about, well, where am I now? What's my job title? What am I doing? What skills do I use every single day? What do I do day to day? And then look at where I started. So just think about the current job you're in. Where are you now and where did you begin? Once you've done that, you've already seen that there has been a bit of a journey. The next question to ask yourself is, okay, well, on that journey, what were my highs and lows? Where did I think I couldn't do this? Or actually, I really achieved at that and I never thought I would. So think about the highs and lows and spend a moment enjoying those highs, revisit them and just spend a moment kind of thinking, yeah, do you know what? I did that. I'm proud of myself. A little bit of self-compassion there is really helpful. Also think about what kept you motivated, who kept you motivated even, because we sometimes forget that we can reach out for help. We just need to be mindful sometimes of who we reach out to. So who helped us? What helped us? How did we get through it? It may not have been a person. It may have been a book that you read. It may have been a film that you watched and a character you resonated with. So what were your motivators? Maybe even consider any lessons that you learnt. And then once you've done that little bit of reflection, you can think about what next, because you now have a blueprint of a journey that you have overcome, that you have been through, which has taken you through ups and downs, barriers you've had to get over, but you've clearly got over it because you're here right now. And once you can recognize that you do have a blueprint for success, which you've been through, which means you can do it again, you can then think about what next. So that's probably the first exercise I'd ask you to try.
Actually being able to do something about it, and that recognition that actually everybody's been on their own version, whether you are somebody who's just recently come into the employment sector, but even for younger audiences, kids at school, they all go through their own little journeys, right? And especially for career changes and things like that, actually some of the decisions that they're making are very early on in their years. We always say this as teachers, but the truth is that the classroom and the playground is a jungle, right? And we're all trying to learn to navigate that, and as young people. What about for those younger sort of high school 11-year-old 12-year-old children who are learning to step into that sort of adulthood, right, and that environment of work? Is there anything that you would suggest that they could do to help them make better decisions, or decisions that are more focused on the confidence in their passions, as opposed to the blueprint that everybody else sort of writes for them?
Yeah, the stuff that everybody puts on us can become quite a heavy chain around us. But two things. The first is actually at 11 years old, have a bit of fun. Please try and enjoy your childhood. And I know that's a silly thing, but there's a lot of pressure on young people these days, and it starts much, much younger nowadays. They've got exams to take. They need to get into the top set. Those sorts of pressures that maybe other people aren't even putting on them, but they're putting on themselves. So try, at the very least, to recognize what you enjoy and engage with that for a little bit. But then another thing that we always used to do as teachers is you don't ask a child, what job do you want to do when you grow up? Because that leaves you in a very fixed position. So, for example, a child might say, I want to be a vet. If you ask them instead, what problems do you want to solve? That child may actually say to you, I want to help animals. Now, if they just said, I want to be a vet, because that's the only way they can think of to help animals, then it's very straightforward. You go and take these A-levels, you go to that school, and then you do this, and there you go, now you're a vet. But actually, if their desire, if their passion or their purpose is to help animals, they could potentially work for an animal charity. They could go abroad and work for a sanctuary. They could rescue animals. They could do so many different things. They could work for a charity and fundraise to support animals. So it's about asking people, what problems do you want to solve, and not that closed question of what do you want to be when you grow up. So that would be the advice I'd give to teachers, is just not put those boundaries on people straight away, always try and ask the slightly more open questions.
Well, I think that's exactly the right question to be asking. Now, if we flip that around, right, and look at employers, because there's a huge amount of responsibility that sits on, the industries or the organizations that are employing people or giving opportunities to people, I guess. But again, it's for them to also recognize, that what they're doing with the idea in their mind that, we need a diverse workforce, but it's more of a trendy thing to do, rather than understanding the reasoning behind why that would be good. How did they, first recognize they will flourish in the future if they were to do this? But first, they almost need to become aware that they are not doing it, right? And that it isn't just a tick box exercise. What would you suggest to them to first do as a step into this?
Well, recognizing it is actually a good step. That would be the first thing. The second thing is we need to focus on inclusivity and not just diversity, because diversity is more of that tick box. Inclusivity is about what can we learn from everybody. And it's about thinking about inclusivity even before that person comes into your workforce. Has everybody got the same opportunity to access that particular job? Are people being put off because they think I'm too old or I'm too female or I'm too something else? So right from the very start, you need to be open about what are the absolute 100% we need these requirements, but where are you willing to learn? But also you might need to even think about where you're advertising, how you're advertising. Is your message actually putting some people off, even if it's unconscious? And so we do need to look at some of those unconscious biases as well. When it comes to then bringing people into the workforce, it's not enough to say, oh, yeah, we're giving everyone a seat at the table if you don't listen to them. So again, you see a lot of organizations who have the listening event. Oh, yeah, let's tell me all of your problems. Let's let's hear from you. And then nothing gets done. So I would even say it's very simplistic. Take a leaf out of some of the gyms that I've seen where they do the whole, you said, we did. And actually be accountable for the changes that you make. It is not enough just to pay lip service to it and say, oh yeah, we're doing this. People do need to see change, and they won't necessarily recognize what's wrong if they don't see change early on. But if they start thinking, well, why is this feeling stagnant? They are going to leave eventually. And if your organization is stagnant, then that's one thing. But if other organizations that are more progressive are moving forward, then what's actually happening is you're moving backwards. So it is really important not only to focus on diversity, but the inclusivity of hearing people when you give them a seat at the table. But that starts at the point of even before recruitment.
I think those things that you're talking about, and I like it because your books actually work on multiple different levels. And, they don't just talk to the individual, but also, give the tools and, understanding to organizations. And as we know, it's a 50-50 thing. As much as we want to step forward, you've got to have a hand to hold you, to bring you closer, right? And I think that really resonates through your work. Now, something that I wanted to touch on, which we talked about the other day, which sort of hit a chord with me, was around the difference between skills and strengths. And what we end up doing, but what we really set out to do, right? And how those paths can end up being quite far away from each other. Could you just elaborate a little bit on that idea that people do want to do well, but sometimes end up doing well a thing they never set out to do. Yeah. And now they're sort of missing that, and therefore a gap forms there.
Dopamine is a very powerful thing. And the problem with dopamine is it's not very discerning. We have an achievement and it goes, woo, hey, we've got an achievement, so that's great. But that's the problem. And that's how we start achieving based on our skills rather than our strengths. Now, they sound very similar, but we need to understand that there is a key difference between them. Both skills and strengths are things that we are very, very good at performing. But those things on our skills list are the things that can exhaust us. The things on our strengths list we can work out, we can improve on, but they really energize us. So to give you an example of this, one of my skills is organization. I'm really, really good at it. I organize events, and then all my friends go, Audrey will organize it. I hate it. I really, really dislike organization because I find it boring. I have to really focus on attention to detail, and it really tires me out. But because I've worked at it and it's been part of my job, it is a skill that I have. And it would be so easy almost to get promoted in an events organization company, or to get a job which focuses on those skills only. But actually, the other thing that I love to do is present, speak, teach, talk, all of those things. And that really energizes me. And so in the job that I do now, I speak, I deliver training, I work with people, and I also organize. But because it plays more to my strengths, it keeps me more energized even through the tougher moments. So another piece or little tip that I would suggest is make a note of all the things that you can do really, really well. and then divide them into skills and strengths. The things that you put in the skills list are the things you can do really, really well, but you feel exhausted once you've done them. And then in the strengths list, the things you can do really, really well, but you feel energized. And the second little thing that I would suggest there is, please don't be embarrassed about what goes under your strengths list, because I do this, and usually in a creative class, what you get is you'll do a job description and talk about, night work or working with spreadsheets and things. It's almost like a negative. And it's about recognizing that you may not like those, but other people might love night work and working on their own. They may love spreadsheets. That's okay. You're not weird if you like something that you think other people don't. So whatever you put in your strengths, that's what energizes you. And if you know that and you're comfortable with that, own it, and then go and look for work that really supports your strengths.
Excellent. One thing you mentioned the other day was around safety, right? Doesn't matter which organization you go on, you could be working in anywhere, in any shape or form, and you're guaranteed that you're going to have to go through health and safety. And there's a huge emphasis that organizations put on health and safety, don't fall over this, especially in engineering, don't put your hand in this machine or go over that barrier, right? But there's another side to that, and that's the safety and the safeness that you feel on a mental capacity. And you talked about, the differences there and why organizations or people focus so much on the physical, side of safety, but sort of brush past, do it as a side thing, in terms of the mental side and the well-being of people. What can you more elaborate on that as for organizations, and really send out a message that they are, if the same, if not more important, right, to make sure that, that people are mentally safe, you could say.
Well, it's about recognizing that psychological safety is part of health and safety in general. That is actually part of the health and safety executives directives. You do need to cover psychological safety. But unfortunately, what happens is that there is so much focus on the solutions to psychological health and safety being about the individual, not about changing the practices themselves. So this kind of brings me, I've got some props in the corner here, to the first thing that I will do when I'm talking about this. I have a piece of caution tape. And what you can do, what I do is quite happily put this caution tape out there, and people obviously just avoid that space. Imagine if that was on the front door of a psychologically unsafe workforce. People would immediately question and say, I don't know why I don't think I should go in there. And then it's only taken down once the working practices actually fulfill what makes you feel comfortable to ask questions, what allows you to whistleblow without fear of losing your job, that there's no cliques, there's no gaslighting, there's no bullying, or at least it's being tackled appropriately. It's really important to recognize that when it comes to psychological safety, it is not just the individual that has to just get stronger. It is about the organization saying, why are so many people going off sick? Why are so many people exhausted? Do they actually have the tools? Are they feeling that their job is safe? Are they being paid fairly? Some of these factors, and this is old research. This is 1959. Hertzberg talked about hygiene factors. And these are things which are important to every job that stop us feeling, or stop us getting ill, actually, in a job. And they are things like pay and conditions. Do I have the tools to actually be able to do my job? Are there things that keep me feeling secure in my job? And he says they're very different to the things that motivate us and help us thrive. And they are two very separate things. The things that help us thrive are opportunities for growth, supervision and praise, and being encouraged. You can't just have one set of things without the other, because otherwise you're in a situation where loads of people maybe have lots of opportunities, but if their job is very, very insecure, how can they actually thrive? Because they might think, well, if I put all that effort in, I may not have this job next week. So we need to think about both things. And sometimes the solution isn't psychological, it's practical.
When we move that forward and we try to put that in practice, we teach people. Right, we teach people how to, like you said, avoid the hole in the floor, right, so that it's safe. How can organizations get better at teaching people about their own oneself, about making them, giving them more strength mentally, and what can they do on a practical level?
Model it.
Okay.
That's one of the best things leaders can do, is model that behavior. It's the same thing. As a teacher, you'll know this. We like to encourage children to read. And then that child turns around to you and goes, Miss, what are you reading? And you go, don't know. And that's a problem. How can you encourage somebody to do that particular thing if you are not demonstrating it yourself? So the leader needs to be the first person who sits there and goes, I'm looking after my mental and emotional fitness. I'm building this. If as a leader, I'm trying to tell people, shut your emails down, go home at the end of the day and don't think about work, you need to be doing that too. Now, a lot of recent research, and this is Dr. Lauren Howe has done this, she's found that if leaders talk about not just having sought help for their own, say, mental ill health at times, but actually that these particular things have worked for them, that encourages more people to go and seek help as well. The other thing, and this is Dr. Laura Gerg who talked about this is about email etiquette. And I know this sounds really silly to talk about, but it's so important. If you receive an email, I'll throw this out to you and anyone listening. If you receive an email on a Sunday night and it's from work or something important, do you feel compelled to answer it? I do. And then I panic if I can't actually answer it right now because, it's a Sunday night and I'm doing something else. And so a simple piece of email etiquette that Gerg found is to say to people, I'm sending this at the weekend because this suits my times. I'm a freelancer. I'm not expecting you to answer it straight away. And that really helps because in her research, she's found that the pressure on the person who's receiving the email is far greater than the pressure on the person sending the email. And actually, the person sending the email they've even said, I don't want you to answer it straight away because it puts pressure on me to then respond. So manage that interaction. Just simply say to people, this is the situation. I'm not expecting you to answer it right now, and relate it to that. Use the out of office. And use the out of office and signature to tell people about your work times, because that way you've managed expectations of people. It kind of goes back to my PhD about the emotional expectations that people place on the role. But if you use on your signature, I work at this time in GMT, then somebody who's emailing at a different time zone, they can understand, I won't be expecting a reply just yet. And also, if you use your out of office, then there's less pressure on you to think, I must respond to that immediately, which means that you have got that opportunity to switch off a little bit.
Excellent. Audrey, with regards to the kind of people that, we work with or are listening to this, they are, in profile terms, they are as wide as you can get. And they should be. So what happens is we get new entrants, so younger audiences. We get mid career transition, that sort of thing. We also have aging workforces in engineering that, want to pass on their skills and sort of haven't been able to because there isn't a layer underneath to give it to. But at the same time, they all have different needs and, they all vary in their circumstances. But one thing that you said about, resilience side of things is that we have to accept that, one size never fits anyone, right? And there's a huge array of circumstances, whether it's someone coming back from maternity leave, whether it's somebody, who is living in a much more poorer area. They're all going to constantly want to try and engage with some of the tasks that you set out and some of the things that, are in your books. And every now and again, they're going to get a knockback. Right? They're going to keep getting, hold on, this circumstance has made me just stop. And I think that people fall off very quickly at that. What can we do more at, trying to make sure that they're okay with that, right? That actually knockbacks and obstacles and barriers are something that we accept rather than try to stop us. I think that's a really important, because I've seen it over and over again where somebody has taken a step to try and do something better. Something has knocked them in their circumstances, and then they've gone, you know what, I just better stop, and knock their confidence straight out. What can they do better there?
A lot of people will talk about, once that knockback happens, how we learn from failure and how we pick ourselves back up again. I'm actually going to take us back even further.
Okay.
And this is a lovely little exercise that I'd like to do, because the reason why we may get knocked back is actually because we get derailed very easily. If we don't actually know our goal, if we don't actually know what we're looking for, then it becomes quite easy to get distracted, and that can then result in taking 2 steps back. So this exercise, many people know this as the well-being wheel, but I've adapted it slightly for this particular purpose. You draw your circle and you outline a goal. What is it that you're trying to achieve? So is it a career change? Is it an ideal life scenario? But so let's just go with career change. And what you need to do is, in this wheel, you draw it into your own segments, is what's the most important things? What are your priorities when it comes to that career change? And it might be that career change has to accommodate family. That is really important. So family is about a quarter of this. That's really big. Another quarter of this is it has to pay a certain amount of money because my family and I need to continue our standard of living. That's absolutely fine. That's not a problem. It may be that you want to be nearer to work. So distance. That's a key factor. And then it might be, what skills do I actually, or strengths preferably, do I really want to perform in it? And that might take up a few more things. That might be, I don't know, I want to use spreadsheets. That's okay. I want to do presentations. These are the things that are really important to you, that you put down in this wheel, that your career change needs to allow you to have. Maybe training is really important as well. And you can look at any new job and you can say, well, how does that job actually sit on a scale of 0 to 10 on all of these factors? So say that you're doing a job already and now you see a new opportunity. Well, it allows me to spend time with my family. So that's about a 7 or 8. That's really good. Money is not so good. So that's maybe a 4 or 5, but it's really near, and I get to do the jobs that I like doing, and I kind of get trained. So you can see you've got a visual representation of what that job looks like. Now you might think, well, it's great, but money is okay. Money is a bit low, so but I can get over that. This is where this wheel that you have drawn out, you have chosen the segments, becomes really important, because money is so important to you. It's taken up a quarter of that wheel. Can it really be something you're prepared to sacrifice? You may think you can when you go and think about changing jobs because you're really unhappy, and our minds get quite clouded when we're unhappy. But it might be once you start the job and that money really isn't enough, it is a problem. So that's why visual representation of what it is you're looking for really helps you focus that search and allows you to apply, because it takes a lot of time and energy to apply to the jobs that are going to work for you.
You know what, I'm enlightened by that, because you're absolutely right. You know, you see a job, you know, on a job site or a job description, and your natural form is to look at how far away is it from me and how much money has it got. And the reason you do that is because that's the immediate information that's available to you, right? And 2, you kind of let everything else fit, right? You sort of say, well, you know what, I'm sure I can fit into this, right? And if there's something on that list that I can't do, I'll learn to do it. The truth is that you're moving away from the goal.
Yes.
Right. Every time you do that.
Yeah.
And I can absolutely resonate with that, because that works. It would work for me. Right.
Brilliant. This is my client's favorite tool.
Yeah, it is a great tool, because, you know, actually I've never even thought about doing it that way, and for our listeners, and, you know, for the people, you know, that are going to be doing so much of this, you know, moving around as the economy changes and careers and all this, what a clever way to sort of, you know, visualize,
yes,
you know, what needs to be done and what am I aiming for? Because you're right, because then you get derailed, right? And if you're not aiming for that target, then you're compromising, and depending on the size of your segment, how willing are you to compromise that? Yeah. I think that's a clever way. And if we flip that around, I think there's a message there for employers too, being that, what are you putting in your job descriptions?
Yep.
Right? You know, if people are looking for these things, are you giving them enough reality, right, of the job day to day, everything that's going on, that actually allows them to make that decision? Because the truth is that recruitment costs a lot of money. So if you keep trying to advertise it, right, or market it, and not being clear on what the job actually entails, then people coming into it are not happy, right, and therefore end up leaving or end up upsetting the organization, and it doesn't work. The fit's not right. So I think that tool is absolutely great for individuals, but it's absolutely critical for employers too, right? They need to be showing what is it that we're doing. When we talk about electrification, be clear.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. It's about saying, what are our values? What are we trying to do? And being honest about it. I come back to my point about spreadsheets. If your organization really values a certain type of task, just be open with it, even if it's perhaps a little bit unpalatable for other people. It will attract the right person to you if you're open and honest. If you try and disguise it and hide it, then you'll end up employing the wrong people. This takes me back to my very first book, which is Be a Great Manager, where we look at recruitment. And the key phrase that I learned when I was delivering training at the NHS was somebody has to have the skills, absolutely, the ability to do it, the will, they must want to do it, but they must fit the bill. They need to fit within that organizational ethos. It needs to connect with their own personal values as well. And if it doesn't fit, then actually that's going to become a real problem further down the line.
Absolutely. Now, these sort of tasks that you have, these sort of tools that you've got, these pragmatic approaches are quite you're quite open about them in the books, and also as someone who supports not just individuals but businesses too, right? And I think that it would be good to try to understand, what do we need to do going forward, the next steps. Now, if you imagine, we've got employers listening on to this podcast. We've got individuals, we've got trade bodies, right? We've got so many different, charitable trusts who try to support career changes. A lot of the stuff that we do actually draws to the armed forces, and when they're coming out from armed forces are quite, acceptable into this sort of skill area. What messages would you like to put out there in terms of the next steps they should all be taking? Obviously, one of them, I think, should be pick up the books, right? There's so much in there, but there is, other things that they may want to do. What are those things that you would suggest that they do straight away as a way forward now?
Listen to people. Ask people what is it that they are looking for, and don't just assume. Because too often we have the conversation, just for example, working from home versus working in the workplace. So many people who work from home will go, oh, we all want to work from home, and that's all there is. But actually, for some people, they can't get on the Wi-Fi. They're sharing a computer. It just doesn't work for them. So just because our assumption is something, it doesn't mean everybody's assumption is that. So the first thing I would suggest is just go out, speak to people, learn from them. You can't solve everybody's problem, but you are at least going to be able to learn. And just as an example of this is, if we don't bother to talk to people, our mind remains very, very closed like this. But the minute we actually learn to talk to people, and there's going to be, I'm holding up one of those ketchup pots you can get from any little fast food restaurant. And everyone just thinks, oh, it's a little ketchup pot. But if you're like me, and I'm a bit greedy, I like more ketchup. This is what it's like when you actually avoid the assumption and speak to someone. You begin to realize that actually this ketchup pot can get a lot bigger and hold a lot more ketchup if you just open it up a bit more. So think of assumptions as being very, very closed, and listening to people as being much more open. You can take in a lot more information, which means you've got more choice with how to move forward.
Oh, brilliant. And in terms of looking forward, all the work that you're doing is absolutely critical, but there is an end goal, right? What would you like to see, right, going forward, 5-6 years down the line? What would you like to see that's happening in industry, in people's careers? More of, you've got a clear path in how we should do it, but you did this work because you wanted something to change. What does that change look like in the future?
For me, I would love, in a way, to be done out of a job. Because whilst I'm still having to go into organisations, whilst I'm still career coaching and so on, it means something is still wrong. And the saddest part is, recently I was asked to talk about the stress at work, because people going off sick is at a 10-year high. The last 10-year high was when I was doing my PhD. And I said to them, well, nothing's changed then, has it? We still are not putting in the right things. We are still putting it all on the individual, or we're still doing practices in the workplace which are causing people stress. And so I would love to see it that when leadership and leadership training and leadership academia can take a step back, and we just have a workforce that cares about leadership within its own profession, within its own field, and are doing all of these things. And all of us academics have to go and find a different topic to talk about. Brilliant.
I think that I agree with you. I think that if we're doing what we're doing right now wasn't happening in 5 years, then we've kind of solved the problem. And that would be a nice place to be. Well, thank you very much for today. And firstly, I'd like to say, if anyone's out there, who wants to step into this or learn more about it, then I think the books that I've been given today by Audrey, right, are very important. I'm going to get that signed, actually, if that's all right with you, right? Because I think it's really fascinating, the amount of work that you've put into this to support people and understand those individual needs, right, is so, admirable. And I think that thank you for doing the work and supporting the industries and people, because most important to me are always that if we're going to really thrive in innovation, if we're really going to thrive in, making a change in the, technological futures, then it's got to be focused on people, because it's people who make changes, it's people who drive innovation, right? Innovation isn't a product, it's a process, and therefore we should respect that. I think that's an important thing. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for joining me on this electrifying episode of Switching On Electrified Skills Podcast. Together, we'll shape a future that is powered by electricity. If you would like to learn more about electrification and explore courses and jobs, please visit ershub.co.uk or connect with us via social media channels. Thank you once again for joining me today. Until next time, keep charging ahead and unleash the full potential of your electrifying skills.